Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this web talk on Japanese foreign policy in the 21st century. My name is Patrick Walz. I'm responsible for the civic education program of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom in Hessen and Rheinland-Pfalz. This event was organized together with our partners from the Hessen-based Karl-Hermann Flach Foundation, the Europa Union Frankfurt, represented by Klaus Klipp. Hello, Mr. Klipp. The Young European Federalists of Hessen, here represented by Johannes Armbrust, and the think tank Polis 180 with their presidents Etienne Hörer and Anna-Lorraine Mundorf. Thank you as well for supporting this event. And for the Naumann Foundation, our very own fellow, Stephen Schwartz, has pulled the strings and will also be the host for this event. Together, we were able to bring a very distinguished panel of experts together, and I'm keen to introduce it to you. Let me begin with our keynote speaker, Mr. Shinichi Asazuma, the Consul General of Japan in Frankfurt. Mr. Asazuma served at the Embassy of Japan in Berlin until 2006, and his last posting was at the Embassy of Japan in Vietnam as envoy. Mr. Asazuma, we are glad and honored to have you with us this evening. And we're looking forward to your keynote speech. Then we have Dr. Ellie Pohlkamp, who is a visiting fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations. She has published on Japan's foreign and security policy, and I'm glad to have you with us again for another event. We already covered the Indo-Pacific last year, and well, it's deep enough for a second dive. And I'd also like to introduce Mr. Koki Shigenoi, a research fellow at the prestigious Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies based in Tokyo. Mr. Shigenoi focuses on the affairs of the Indo-Pacific, economic security, and Japan's foreign and security analysis. And I, for one, am looking forward to learning as to how Japan perceives its environment in the Indo-Pacific and how Japan tries to shape it through foreign policy. As a layman, I see similarities to Germany. Japan believes in the rule of law. It is a mercantile country dependent on free trades and open routes. And as the case of Germany shows, a short-sighted foreign policy can put you in really an awkward spot. So with that said, I'm interested in getting to know the Japanese approach and how Japan intends on strengthening democratic principles in a world in which some actors would like to turn it into a multipolar one, where rules are defined by hegemons and not by international law. The talk will be moderated by our Naumann fellow, Stephen Schwartz, who also pitched the idea for this event to me. Thank you, Stephen, for bringing us all together, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick, for this lovely introduction. Before we start, I'd like to express my own gratitude to our speakers for making this event possible. And yes, as Patrick outlined before, I'll now give the floor to Consul General Asazuma, who will provide us with a short keynote speech on the political situation and the framework of European-Japanese relations. Mr. Consul General Asazuma, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Schwartz. And it is a great pleasure and honor to me to be here today on this panel, co-sponsored by the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, EU Frankfurt, and others organization. Yeah. Since last year, the economic prosperity or peace and security we have enjoyed have been fundamentally threatened. And the German Chancellor Scholz said, the word Zeitenwende, times are changing. On the other hand, although the times are changing, the value that we have to keep remain the same as the universal values that have been acquired by mankind throughout its long history. They are democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, etc. And partners who share these universal values, Japan and Europe, have cooperated to maintain global prosperity and stability in spite of geographical distances. In recent years, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, which is central to the prosperity and stability of the international community in the 21st century, we have been cooperating to make this region free and open. As you know, Japan has been pursuing the contribution to the international community to realize this free and open Indo-Pacific, literally under the foreign policy of FOIP. Without going in details, the basic policy consists of the three pillars of, first, promoting and entrenching the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and free trade. The second, pursuing long-standing prosperity, including strengthening connectivity and economic partnerships. And the third, ensuring peace and stability, including improving maritime law enforcement capabilities, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. The United States, Australia, and ASEAN have also articulated strategies for the Indo-Pacific, and in recent years, European Union or Germany, other European countries have also announced their strategies for the Indo-Pacific. Naturally, many elements are shared with our FOIP policy, and this is another indication that we are partners sharing same values. Yes, Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year was a clear challenge to this free and open international order, and an unacceptable and barbaric attempt to change unilaterally the status quo by force or coercion. Furthermore, there are concerns about Russia's use of nuclear weapons, which is an unforgivable act of hostility against humanity as a whole. This unforgivable outrage is a challenge to the fundamental order of the international community and inseparable from the security of the Indo-Pacific region. Unfortunately, concerns about this kind of attempt to change unilaterally the status quo by force are not confined to Europe. Unfortunately, China's recent behavior in the South China Sea, East China Sea, and Taiwan Strait has caused great tension in the region. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a great shock to Japan as well, as it received that an armed invasion is a real possibility and was a major reminder that the time have changed. Zeitenwende. Zeitenwende as a symbolic word of the past years is also true for Japan, not in Germany. In December last year, Japan released the so-called 3 defense documents: a new national security strategy, national defense strategy, and defense build-up programs. These documents provide strategic guidance in light of the current severe security environment and represent a major shift in the practical aspect of Japan's post-World War II security strategy. although the focus tends to be on so-called counter-strike capabilities and doubling the defense budget. This strategy also includes perspectives on strengthening the current international order, not only in defense and military affairs, but also in addressing global issues such as climate change and infectious diseases, as well as in cooperation in shaping international rules. The new strategy itself has been in the work for some time, but the timing of its adaptation may be the result of the realization of Japan's sidewind, changing time. As we face these difficult times, I would like to reaffirm that Japan and Europe are partners in sharing fundamental values. In promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, as well as in addressing global challenges, governments are not the only actors. The participation of civil society, including NGOs, is also important. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a great shock to Japanese civil society as well. Many Japanese civil society organizations have been involved in providing assistance to Ukraine and cooperating with NGOs in the US and Europe as well. Well, Japan took over the G7 presidency from Germany this year. I hope that Japan and Europe will continue to cooperate with each other in a wide range of areas as partners who share values in an international society that is completely unpredictable in the future. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Consul General Asazuma. Many thanks for your invaluable insights. And we'll now move forward. We've got quite a broad set of issues to discuss. And I would like to pick up some of those elements you have already mentioned, and namely Sino-Japanese relations, Japan-European relations, and finally, Japan's value-based foreign policy. I guess we forgot to mention that you all participants are invited to submit questions to this discussion afterwards via the chat button. So yes, at 8 p.m. We'll move forward to a more broad discussion involving the audience, and you're all invited to submit your questions. But yes, for the moment, I would like to give the floor to Koki, and I thought we might commence with a more general topic, the bilateral relations between the People's Republic of China and Japan, being close neighbors, but rivals as well. What do you think is the actual relationship between Japan and China? Would you like to elaborate a little bit about your perspective with a more scientific background?
Great, thanks so much, Stephen. Could you share the screen? Could you share my slides, if possible? The page 1 and page 2. Okay, so oh, great, perfect. So thank you very much indeed again for having me today. It's an honor to be part of this great discussion organized by the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung. And today we are going to cover some topics regarding Japan, include Japan-China relations, Japan's EU-Japan relations, and the free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP. But many already discussed these topics, so I'm trying to add some new elements from a different angle today. The first topic is Sino-Japanese relations. So let me start by sharing this line graph. So it illustrates US, China, and Japan's economy from 2000 to 2021. I just want you to remember in 2009, when the global financial crisis happened, Chinese economy overtake Japan economy in 2009. So please remember the number 2009. And besides, a British think tank called Center for Economics and Business Research predicts that Chinese economy overtake American ones by 2030. But recent analyses show that it won't be happen due to Beijing's long-standing zero-COVID policy, US-China decoupling, potential Taiwan contingency, and so on and so forth. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, now I will briefly explain about Japan-China relations, from the Chinese foreign policy strategy and Japan-US engagement with China perspective. So this table describes the transition of Chinese foreign policy and Japan-US-China policy. In 1989, then President Deng Xiaoping believed to promote the idea called Toko Yokai, Yusho Sakui, which pronounced in Japanese, I don't speak Chinese, so, which means hide its capability and wait for the right opportunity. Do what you can do. So this is what Toko Yokai means. The doctrine is said to have been created by Deng Xiaoping, the president, in an attempt to survive the Western sanctions against the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident and not be entangled in the collapse of the socialist country. Basically, the logic behind the doctrine is that diplomacy is subordinate to economic development and cooperative diplomacy is necessary for economic development. On the other hand, during the Cold War, the United States and Japan supported Chinese economic development. The both countries calculate that after achieving economic development, China will democratize itself. It never happened, by the way. So then in 2009, when the global financial crisis happened, China under Hu Jintao administration became more active in its diplomacy. It called great diplomacy or active diplomacy. But still, they kept Toko Yokai Yusho Sakui doctrine. At this time, active doesn't mean pursuing hegemony. Around 2010 to 2012, due to territorial dispute with China, Japan sought to decrease its economic dependence on China. After Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, through twists and turns, China changed its foreign policy from the previous one to warfare diplomacy, as you know, and became more ambitious in all directions. In parallel, of course, the United States and Japan turned its strategic posture vis-a-vis China. Now it's kind of confronting China in military and also economic. So this is a very broad picture of China foreign policy, China-Japan relations, and in transition, and Japan-US-China policy. So yeah, I will stop here, and maybe you, Stephen, you can just ask the other participant.
Thanks. Patrick, as mentioned before, Germany is suffering great problems due to its economic dependence on Russia and China. So, I mean, Japan is another country known for its economic dependence on China, mainly speaking in terms of exports and its dependence on assembly processes that had been outsourced to China. Recently, you have published an article with regards to all these implications and what Japan has done in order to overcome this dependence and the problems emanating from this dependence. Could you elaborate a little bit about what precisely Japan has done in order to overcome these problems and the other dimension, the problems emanating from the economic dependence and the political tensions concerning the exacerbation in the South China Sea and the airspace infringements of China.
Stephen, are you asking me or?
Yes, I was asking you. Could you elaborate a little bit about the implications, emanating from these dependence on Chinese supply?
Thank you. I would love to.
Measures undertaken.
Can you again share my slides, page 3? Great. Next page, please. Yes. Okay, great. Yes. Yes, I just explained about the Chinese foreign policy transition. So again, this background, the US shifted their strategic posture against China and Japan as well. And I just want to highlight here is that the Japan's economic policy toward China against the background of this political and the geopolitical shift. And recently, I published 2 articles in this regard, one on Japan's China +1 policy and another on Japan's economic security policy. From these studies, I can say, although it's very difficult, Japan have been trying to reduce its dependencies on China. And there is a few success cases, such as like Japan used to be over 90% dependence on China for rare earths, like rare metals, tungsten, and so on. But now it's under 60%. So this is caused by the government-led 2020 international resource strategies. So the government published these strategies and they prepare and worked on this, reducing dependencies on China. Anyway, the important point here is that Japan is pioneering to implement economic security policies today and reducing its dependence and strengthen its supply chains and achieve diversification are main objectives in this policy. In summary, the Europe can, so Japan made many things like, established a new national think tank on economic security studies, established a new ministerial post like a minister for economic security. And also we have established a national security secretariat in 2014 and added the new section, economic section in 2019, and which prepared the Economic Security Promotion Act, which is the bill passed last year at the National Diet. So we have, institutionally adapted and the political leadership led this whole package, and also, to collaborate with other like-minded partners such as US and as well as Europe. So it is promoting and it is ongoing project, and so still it's experimental phase, but some results are already, outcomes are already we can see. And so from this practice, I can say Europe can learn from Japan, and there is many room for EU-Japan further cooperation. So I suppose Ellie will talk about EU-Japan cooperation after this topic. So yeah, I stop here. Thanks.
Many thanks for your introduction to the next topic. But first of all, I'd like to ask Dr. Polkamp. First of all, I'd like to ask you a question. It's indeed a bold claim Koki has just made, that Europe can learn from Japan when it comes to diversification and reducing dependence on China. Do you agree on that matter, or would you say it's rather, the results are rather mixed when it comes to these efforts? What is your perspective on these dependence on China? And I mean, Koki as well as Consul General Asasuma and Patrick have already mentioned the aspect of Europe and Japan cooperating in their efforts of reducing dependence on China. What precisely has Europe done in order to overcome this dependence? And what do you believe could be said if we are to compare the European efforts with the Japanese ones?
Thank you very much for this very broad question, and also for having me on this panel. It's an honor to speak with my fellow speakers. To your question, what can the EU learn or Germany learn from Japan? So what we have to understand is that Japan is dealing with China and the threat perception of China much longer than Germany or the EU realize that China is a problem. So all the strategies that Japan has introduced are a long-term discussion, and they have been evolving a long way for many years to come already. And where we have finally come to a point where the geopolitical circumstances have become so severe, also as Prime Minister Kishida has said, that Japan basically now had no choice but to introduce new ways, introduce new courses, of course, everything within their FOIP strategy. In my opinion, Japan is not trying to fully decouple from China, because this is not possible. And this is also something where I believe the Japanese administration is fully aware of. But they also know that they will not have any peaceful relations in the near future. So there are many, many different policy fields and problems where they try to navigate around. So one way has been what Shigenoi-san has said, the economic security strategy Japan has introduced has been one very, very clever strategy, and where Japan has realized quite early where the problems actually lie, also with regard to China, and also how to at least partly decouple in areas that have been most sensitive, like critical technologies, etc. And this is where Japan started and introduced the path where the EU and also EU member states can certainly learn of. But as I said, Japan is thinking of how to best deal with China for many years to come now. And in comparison to that, the EU started to do that by releasing their EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, and is trying to move one step after the other. So there is a huge gap in perception. And of course, also China is a different threat for Japan than it is for the EU, also militarily. And I mean, on a daily basis, Japan perceives Chinese advances, and this is something the EU is still a little away from, and this is also what makes the argumentation sometimes harder, that we have to look to China and we have to find ways to how to deal with China. And so as Japan does it, I mean, basically Japan is trying to have a cold peace. So in earlier years, you said we had cold politics and hot economics. This was how you described the Sino-Japanese relations for quite a while. And now we are very much moving towards, a cold peace, so to say, with partial decouplings and which is also one reason because of the US-China rivalry, where Japan is very much in between. And this is a very important aspect where Japan is basically forced to do and to enter a path to pick sides which they originally did not want to but have to, and the EU is not there yet. So what are the EU and Japan basically doing? We have a very, very solid and strong relationship. Since 2019, we have the strategic partnership agreement, we have the economic partnership agreement, we have the connectivity strategy. Japan and the EU are, as Azuma-san already said, they have a huge strategic partnership, a very strong partnership. They are like-minded countries with shared values, and Japan is the EU's closest strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific region and is a key ally also for the implementation of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. And moreover, they are trying to enhance their cooperation in various fields, also as the first Green Alliance partner, and also in the digital realm with the just recently agreed digital partnership agreement. And within the whole connectivity strategy that the EU and Japan have, there's also the digital part, which has strong potential for joint cooperation for the Indo-Pacific, also with regard to China. So by jointly promoting the digital transition, which can influence climate change and also battle fundamental innovation and infrastructure building on the digital realm, and also the fight against technological sovereignty that China has introduced, there is great legal potential on the EU-Japan relationship where these common and shared democratic values that they have can be promoted also vis-a-vis China.
Many thanks. Before I resume this discussion, I'd like to draw to your attention, I'm speaking to the audience, that I was wrong in saying you have to submit your questions via the chat button. It's indeed the Q&A button you have to use. So yes, in case you have any questions for the ensuing discussion, please use the Q&A button. But yes, Mr. Consul General Asasuma, you have heard the previous speakers, and as Dr. Polkamp, who, by the way, is a fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations, through the last decades, many frameworks have been established between the European Union and Japan, and especially through last 10 years, mainly thanks to the to former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who last year became target of a heinous assassination. Thanks to him, Europe and Japan have succeeded in creating new frameworks such as the EPA, already mentioned, or the Green Alliance. Which of these sets that Dr. Polkamp has just outlined do you believe, or does Japan believe, are the most important and most promising new sets Japan hopes to use in order to overcome the common problems? For, as Patrick said at the beginning, he identifies many commonalities between Japan and Europe. And when it comes to China, without any doubt, we have a common challenge and a common rival and partner. So what is your opinion on this issue?
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the presentation of Mr. Shigenoi and Ms. Polkamp. And yes, I totally agree with the current sort of your presentation. And so, as our previous speaker mentioned, Japan has also very close economic relations with China. Of course, in Germany, the total, so actually 8% of the German foreign trade but depends on China. But in Japan, 24%, first, so 1/4. Therefore, it is actually so not so possible, or it's not realistic to decouple the economic relationship with China. It's true. However, so perhaps the as I mentioned, and as the previous speaker also mentioned, how to manage this economic relation with China is a very essential agenda, actually. Therefore, the Japan, of course, China is a very big market and big business partner as well. So not only for Japan to Europe, but all over the world, United States as well. Yeah. Therefore, how to manage the economic relationship is very essential. But on the other hand, to listen to very severe geopolitical situations. So with regard to the geopolitical situation, we have to manage the world, manage this region. So in view of the economic security. Mr. Dr. Shigeno mentioned, so Japan government has already introduced the Economic Security Promotion Act and some schemes for promoting the economic securities in the viewpoint of the intellectual property right, patent, also, or actually, so the essential resources, how to enjoy the essential resources, or some kind of economic perspectives with regard to the strategic autonomy and strategic irreversibility, it is said. To address these economic securities, we have to manage the Chinese the relationship with the economic relations and, of course, political relationship with China. It's a very important, so positively or negatively very important partner with China. Okay. And with regard to Japan-EU relations, I totally agree. So thanks to Mr. Abe, so unfortunately, so he killed. And but so recent decades, so last decade, Japan and Europe achieved a very good strategic partnership and to promoting this further cooperation, not only the economic relations, how to address China, but also the more global climate change, so the transformation of the digital or the infectious disease as well. So we have actually very strong partnership and regular consultations in the leader level, and we can promote this kind of cooperations partnerships further. And I'd like to add one more issue: the Japan and especially the Germany. The government of Germany also they agreed to make a intergovernmental consultation. It means not only the foreign minister or defense minister or the economic minister, but all over the more comprehensive issues. Both governments will try to have a consultation. I don't know exactly which is the first theme with what is the first theme for the consultation, but maybe this kind of issues, global issues or the economic security, it may be more plausible at agenda. I hope so. Maybe this will be also good one. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I thank you. Well, that's indeed very interesting, new intergovernmental consultations, which is something Germany does only with a few countries in the world. So yes, obviously the visit Scholz made in Asia shortly following his own accession sees its deeds. We have already talked about many economic aspects of European-Japanese relations. And as you mentioned before, the Free-and-Open Indo-Pacific Vision, which has been the core project or the core dimension of Japan's foreign policy, which has also inspired the European approach on the Indo-Pacific. Also involves a people-to-people exchange as a multi-facet strategy of connectivity. Dr. Polkamp, what precisely have Europe and Japan done in order to improve people-to-people exchange between Europeans and Japanese?
Well, even already prior to the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy, the EU-Japan relations in this regard have been very strong through various exchange programs, be it Erasmus programs or Jean Monnet programs. The student exchange part has been very frequent and very well received from both sides, and also very well funded. And where there have been some changes have been also in the research and innovation part, where with different EU-funded cooperation programs, there have been several exchanges of researchers, and also the information sharing of research has been widely expanded. So this is also, of course, the people-to-people connection is a very important part for the EU-Japanese relationship, but not only on EU basis, but also on member state basis. And besides that, if you allow, I would like to make a short addition to Asazuma-san's comments, where I personally see potentials for the EU-Japan cooperation. I actually see a lot of potential also in the digital partnership, because I believe this is something where the EU is of great value. They have a strong asset in standardizations. They have a strong asset in protecting personal data and in secure cross-border data flows. And this is something where Japan and the EU, in comparison to Japan and the US, are very much alike. And this is something where both parties have similar things to say, and also could have a valuable joint strength to move things forward, also vis-a-vis China, for example. And the other thing is where I see developments in cooperation is actually also the security part, because we have seen not only in Japan, but also, for example, in Germany, that the security aspect and the definition of security has been widened and has included many new domains, and this opens also many avenues for cooperation, be it on the information sharing part, be it on the cybersecurity part, or on the research and development of the artificial intelligence. And even if the security and defense area is not the primary or the key capable area of the EU per se, there have been many approaches, and there has been lots of funding also in this area, for example, maritime security. But we should not only look on the EU as a whole, we should also see what Japan is doing with the each member state. So you have already talked about Germany, Asazuma-san, and I completely agree. I mean, the German-Japanese relation has increased very much, and also on top level. I mean, we had Chancellor Scholz visiting Japan for his first trip to East Asia. We have very deep exchanges due to the G7 presidency, and Germany being the former G7 president, holding the former G7 presidency, and there's lots of exchange also on this level with regard to Ukraine, but also on issues of economic security, where as Shigenoi-san said, Germany can learn a lot from Japan. And we had the 2+2 dialogue. We have negotiations on the acquisition and cross-serving agreement. So the same level of negotiations and talks as with France. We have the cooperation with Italy on the project Tempest. So there's a lot going on between Japan and also EU member states. And this is also where I see potential also for the EU as such, to have each member state as a driving force, and also have maybe develop a broader concept even in areas where the EU has not been that visible yet, but which are areas that gain importance.
Okay, many thanks. In order to understand the important role people-to-people exchange play in bilateral cooperation among democracies, Consul General Azasuma, I'd like to ask you another question, because I know you are very deep into civil society cooperation, and I know you have, yes, and I know you entertain and maintain strong ties to different civil society organizations in Germany. Also Japanese civil society organizations working in Germany. What is your experience and what do you believe civil society can do in order to strengthen democracy and values of democracies among democracies? And how can these values and cooperation among civil society be strengthened by politics as well as by these projects that we have talked about previously?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, so with regard to the relationship with the civil society, the Japanese NGOs, European NGOs, actually, I experienced mainly with the development corporations for the climate change or the infrastructure with human rights, actually. And yes, with regard to development cooperation, of course, the Japanese government, in governmental level, so we have some kind of very close coordination with the European donors or the US donors, and but of course to support the on the in-country basis, so I experienced the importance of the civil society or the NGOs activities. This is my initial experience with the cooperation with the civil society, and yes, right. So not only the perspective of the government, but the other various diversified views civil societies actually offered us, and it is a very constructive. It make actually a very constructive dialogue between government, administration, and the civil societies. And with regard to, yes, not only civil society, but also governmental basis, the cooperation is very important, especially the climate change or digital partnership or some kind of, it closely includes the human rights as well. And I hope yes, a concrete cases, I can imagine that especially more for wider ways, people to people, cooperation, the exchanges. So I hope further cooperation will be elaborated. It's actually it's some kind of abstractive, but it's my personal views. And with regard to just the Japan-EU cooperations, I just mentioned not only the government GG-based cooperation, but also more further area for the among the private sector, the civil society is also very important. And yes, we are now here in Hessen, Frankfurt, and actually, especially the interesting is Hessen is, for example, the government of Hessen, local government of Hessen is very strongly eager to promoting the hydrogen issues. And I will not go into details, but it is very interesting. But the cooperation based in private sector cooperation based between Japan and Germany in the area of the hydrogen is very well organized and advanced. This is also some kind of the grassroots based cooperation between Japan and the European countries. Yes, yeah. Anyway, there are so many actually very verified layer for the cooperation between Japan and Europe and civil societies or the private sectors or the academics and researchers. I hope it will be more strengthened and deepened. Yes, thank you.
I thank you. We'll pick up these topics later on.
Mm-hmm.
We have already talked about the FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision. And as indicated within the invitation, Japan plays an important role as a ward of multilateralism, upholding the rule-based order, and particularly the rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific, and mainly aiming at the ASEAN countries. Koki, to return to the point of departure, what do you believe, or could you outline the basis of this strategy and its orientation towards the ASEAN countries, and how Japanese ASEAN relations have developed through the last years?
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Could you share the page 4? So let me explain from FOIP to the Japan-ASEAN relations. So let me begin with FOIP. Page, yeah, okay, great. So on Japan's value-based foreign policy, I will focus on the FOIP. Japan's foreign policy was centered on, so let me briefly explain from the history. So Japan's foreign policy was centered on the development assistance. After being an economic superpower, Japan's role in international community was mainly this economic development assistance. And because Japan abandoned its military power by the constitution, as you may know, then in 1998, 4 years after published Human Development Report by UNDP in 1994, in which human security is proposed, human security became the very core of the Japan's foreign policy. Under the human security framework, Japan accelerated its development assistance in Southeast Asia and Africa in particular. This is continuing and still one of the Japan's foreign policy pillar, particularly international cooperation. And in 2012, Shinzo Abe took the office second time. He changed Japan's foreign and security policies. This is a very sort of the Japan's Zeitenwende. The first, he published a paper entitled Asia's Democratic Security Dialogue in Project Syndicate in 2012. This idea fruits in the Quad, which originally organized as the Tsunami Core Group in 2004. So Quad is originally a kind of a emergency grouping to deal with the tsunami incident. Then Abe made a very first Japan's national security strategy in 2013. So before that, we don't have any strategy at all. So in this year, he also studied the panoramic diplomacy and visited every continent, met many president, prime ministers of the all continent. And this panoramic diplomacy covering from Southeast Asia to Africa evolves into FOIP in my perspective. So one aspect of FOIP, or the first idea, came from the concept that bridging Japan's previous foreign policy between Southeast Asia and Africa. So this is a kind of the FOIP is combined the Japan's Southeast Asia and African policy together. And this is why Japan's Indo-Pacific, so could you go to the next slide? So this is why Japan's Indo-Pacific definition is broadest among the other Indo-Pacific advocates. The Japan's Indo-Pacific geography starts from North and South America to the African shores. Could you go to the next slide, please? Yes, however, after the US participation in FOIP initiative, the FOIP became kind of or interpreted as China containment theory or great power competition strategy. That's true. look at the US Indo-Pacific strategy or UK integrated review, they use the term Indo-Pacific as a China strategy. So I argued in my previous papers that we must differentiate FOIP and great power competition strategy. It's very, it is easy to classify, by the way. FOIP is driven by inclusivity, whereas great power competition is driven by exclusivity. So this, so the FOIP's inclusiveness is the most important element. And could you go to the next? So because for these reasons, inclusivity, we can include Southeast Asia under the FOIP vision and other developing countries as well, and also known as the global South in our, the FOIP camp. There are 196 countries around the globe, and G7 is only 7 out of 196. By the way, I am originally a Middle East expert and have work experience in Africa. So my recent publication includes a study on Japan-ASEAN relations. So from this perspective, from the global South perspective, I would say there is sort of hostility in the global South against the West. For example, on climate, they think that they have the right to develop, they have a right to grow, but developed countries like us that have already became rich and are kind of ordering us in superior attitudes from the global South perspective. But in the past, they destroyed the environment by emitting carbon dioxide. And now you can survive in an energy efficient society, but why should we give up our growth? So this is a kind of a global South perception. And there is a conflict over values between the few wealthy countries and the global South nowadays. And Japan is at the nexus of this conflict. From the G7 viewpoint, Japan is perhaps certainly lagged behind, such as gender issues, fossil fuels, working environment, etc. But from the global South point of view, Japan is well ahead. The reason why FOIP has accepted worldwide is because Japan is kind of at the equilibrium point in this world. It is significant that Japan defended values such as democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in the FOIP because we have a strong connection with the ASEAN, Africa, the global South still. And if this had been a vision originating from the US or Europe, for example, maybe global South might not have accepted. So the Japan initiating FOIP vision is very variable in this regard from the global South perspective. And ASEAN is, as Stephen mentioned, is one of the very, long-standing Japan's foreign policy priority. So yes, I hope I answered your questions. Thanks.
I thank you. Through the last decades, Japan's ODA played an important role in fostering these relationships. Could you elaborate a little bit about ODA in general and what strategy Japan pursued in using ODA and how it changed through the last years?
Yes, so before, maybe, well, I don't have an exact number, but so Japan has long been investing or assisting the developing countries by providing ODA. And initially, we don't have any kind of a loan package loan, but we provided ODA without any the interest or any burden. Just give them ODA. But after that, I think the kind of the theory of international development or development economics also changed. That the developing country have to have the ownership. So in this theory, the Japanese government also started to providing the ODA with some condition, and now it's more became more strategic. I mean, an economic investment. So I think, at least for me, I think ODA is not a kind of a main tool to assist or engage with developing countries, but also like China. China uses economic statecraft to increase their influence in the global south, and Japan, US have to confront this kind of Chinese economic cohesion. So Japan is now became more, let's say, smarter or maybe more strategic than before, and using more and more kind of business activities, investment, or people-to-people connection at intergovernmental level agreement. So like this, the trend is dramatically shifting from pure ODA to more strategic investment. Thanks.
Hey, thanks. Before we move forward to the questions of the audience, I would like to add another topic, a indeed more contemporary topic, the question of Taiwan. For the last years, Japan's role in the question of Taiwan has increased. For instance, former Vice Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, current Vice President of ruling party of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, has indicated that Japan would be ready to defend Taiwan if it was attacked by China. Dr. Polkamp, in this context, we have a huge discrepancy between Europe and Japan, because Europe remains very divided on this matter, whilst Japan increasingly gets more assertive in its approach on Taiwan. Do you see any new development indicating a common approach between the Europeans and Japan and Taiwan, or do you believe it remains, yes, a discrepancy?
Well, first of all, I don't know if Japan is already ready to defend the country should a Taiwan contingency occur. So, but what Japan is actually doing is preparing very much and doing everything they can to achieve that goal, to be ready to defend the country, and introducing several paths which still need a lot of time for implementation. And one thing has been, as already mentioned, the national security strategy and the documents related. So this is absolutely also one answer on the Taiwan issue. What Japan also is doing is raising the awareness of the problems that lie that come along with Taiwan, and what they try is with very bold diplomacy and also very loud diplomacy is to raise the awareness in Europe that Japan is confronted with a similar problem, that the status quo might be might be changed by force. They very much take the war in Ukraine and Russia's invasion as an example that what has happened in Europe can actually happen in Japan as well. And this is a problem Japan already has for many, many years, but the circumstances and the security circumstances have changed very much. And so Japan is very much trying to raise this issue and raise the awareness and use its diplomatic strengths to do that. And this is what also Prime Minister Kishida is doing with his visits and with how he promotes also Japan's foreign policies and Japan's strategies. And I believe the awareness in Europe is there, even if it's not an issue which is right next door, that the awareness is there that should a war or a conflict arise, it would definitely have consequences for Europe and the world, and would be not an issue that can be, overlooked. So I mean, Europe at the moment, and especially, is very much occupied with the war in Ukraine now. And of course, we need strong European countries to confront the issues related to the war in Ukraine. But we have seen that preparedness and being ready is very, very necessary. And this is actually what Japan is doing on the other side, so to say. So I believe there is an awareness. I don't know if Europe or European countries has realized what consequences, what economic consequences and general consequences Taiwan contingency would have, but Japan is doing its best to actually explain that and say why it is so important not to lose sight of the Indo-Pacific and everything that is happening there.
It's a very important issue, especially given the fact that the TSMC amounts to, I guess, over more than 50% of global market of semiconductors. But before we resume this topic, we have received a question of one of our participants, and he doesn't address one of you, but I guess all of you. Do you see a chance to develop from great competition, which may have eventually a winner and a loser, to a mind of great cohabitation? Germany has the intent to be a good neighbor rather than a leader.
I like this question. Let me answer first.
Floor is yours.
So yeah, thank you very much for your question. It's I really like your wording, great cohabitation. It's really great. So yes, my short answer is it depends on China. Like Russo-Ukraine war, if Russia didn't start invade against Ukraine, it never happened. The Taiwan contingency is the same. If China stays, the situation remains the same. But if China invade against Taiwan, it happened. So it is, my short answer is it depends on China. But to prevent the Taiwan contingency, we have some options. One is deterrence, the military balancing. Now Japan-US alliance or the US multilateral alliances such as AUKUS or maybe Quad, these kind of players are pursuing a balancing policy to contain Chinese military expansionism. And also, we also have to have a engagement, so which is which doesn't push China being isolated. We have to include them we have to give them a room to connect it with the international community. So which in this regard, FOIP is very important. Again, the FOIP is driven by the inclusivity, and if China accept the condition, China can join either CPTPP or FOIP or maybe other multilateral format settings. So we have to have the both strategy, both options. One is balancing and another one is engagement. And if we succeeded to engage with China and keep them stay, maybe we can be great cohabitations. So this is my answer. Thank you.
May I?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Yes, just so one issue. So just mentioned that Dr. Shigeno mentioned the Taiwan Strait possibility. So some protocol. So yes, current tensions in Taiwan Strait. But yes, you mentioned this. So how the Japanese reaction in the case of the Taiwan tension, the Taiwan conflict? It is, of course, I'm government person. It is very difficult to say now for the time being. And of course, it's the Japanese security reaction depends on the evidence of individual cases. Therefore, for the time being, it is very difficult to say the Japanese reaction to for in case of such kind of conflict. But the important issue is to also make an effort to deter such kind of conflict. You meant so last week, I suppose I remember there's some the U.S. think tank CSIS also announces some kind of analysis in the case of the Taiwan conflict, and it's disastrous. China defeated, but United States have huge very more than 3,000 U.S. soldiers. Japan's victim is also, it's not so open, but some kind of very, quite a few victims, very damages. It's a disastrous. It's a no winner in the in this kind of conflict. Therefore, we have to and we should make an effort to prevent such a kind of disasters damage. This is a current point. The deterrence and actually clear message to prevent such a kind of matters conflict. It's a very important one. The Japan adopted this security, national security strategies. It imposes many kind of very challenging issues, but it's actually this kind of security, national security strategies make some kind of clear message to make an effort and to prevent from this kind of regional conflict. Maybe this is a point.
Another point, we've already talked about the Quad, the security dialogue between the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. Currently, there are some discussions on the future of Quad, especially given these current dynamics in the Indo-Pacific. In Japan, there have been some voices with, I guess, the most prominent representative being Ishiba, who spoke in favor of an Indo-Pacific NATO, perhaps something resembling Seattle. Also, this question remains rather, yes, the former Minister of Defense and also former Foreign Minister Taro Kono reacted quite evasive when he was asked on this issue a few days ago. What is your perspective on the future of Quad? What do you believe will become long term? This.
Yeah, Quad itself is actually not any kind of this security. They depend based on the actually treaty or legal binding bodies. This Quad is just a consultation bodies, and the Quad has no any secretariat. just for the 4 countries consultation. And the main purpose is not, of course, actually, so there's a target of the activities, including, of course, main purpose is security issues. But however, the other more important agenda are also involved, like infrastructure connectivities or the maritime security, or of course, the important is climate change or the infectious disease. Therefore, Quad target is a more comprehensive area. Therefore, for the time being, so it is not so appropriate to compare the Quad with the NATO. NATO, yes. In the future, I don't know exactly, but the Quad itself, every participant, Japan, US, Australia, India, they have also its own perspectives, especially India. So India becomes the biggest population country in the world now. Therefore, it is very difficult to emerge the future figure of the Quad, but in principle, Quad countries, so Japan, US, India, Australia, we are the democratic countries, market economies. Therefore, we have shared the same value. Therefore, it is very important body for the stability and the prosperity in the Pacific region. It's good too.
Dr. Polkamp, among political scientists and security experts, what are your prospects on the future of Quad or our frameworks emerging in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, first of all, I think the Quad has been a quite valuable format and a very important format, especially 2 years ago when the Quad meeting was resurrected, so to say. And it is an important format for dialogue, and I would say for setting agendas. They have been introducing many different approaches where the implementation is lacking. So the Quad is an important format to give a direction, and also as a signal to other countries that this format is a strong format that can get together, that shares a lot of approaches, and I believe also especially for countries such as Japan, it is a very, very important format for dialogue and for the general diplomacy, which is very much also based on alliance building and on cooperating with partners. And this is also what the US does, vice versa. So I think in this regard, it has been a good format, but the future is very hard to predict, and the Quad has been quite silent. As I said, they have introduced approaches that have been good, and there have been a good orientation, but yeah, we still have to see what's coming next.
Okay, many thanks. Koki, would you like to add something on the Quad and its prospects, on perhaps with regard to the perspective of the Japanese people on this rather ambitious claim of creating more cooperation in terms of security?
Well, I don't have any additional comment on the Consul General Asatuma and Dr. Polkamp, but the one thing I think that the significance of Quad is that to keep India in. So this mechanism is very important because India is now the biggest population of the world and going to be a military superpower in the region. And the naming Indo-Pacific is one of the reasons is to keep India in this initiative. So India is a very important player, maybe after the several decades or century. So to keep India in in our camp is quite significant. And in doing so, I mean, the Quad is a very useful format, and it should be promoted more and more. Thanks.
Dr. Polkamp, last week we witnessed another new step or new stage of another development with regard to security frameworks, a new cooperation between NATO and Japan. Japan participated within the last Rammstein consultations. Do you see a new Japanese approach on NATO, and what do you believe will emerge from these collaboration?
I think it's absolutely a part of the Japanese strategy in enhancing their alliances and their strategic cooperations, and NATO has been a very, very key part and an important part, especially in terms of security and defense, and raising the dialogue and learning and exchanging information, and maybe also enhancing channels between Japan and NATO is of great importance for Japan, but also for NATO as well. So I personally do expect more connections and more approaches, and I think this path which has been introduced and the connection between Japan and NATO will continue, also out of necessity, and how deep and how far it will be, and I cannot predict, but it will absolutely stay an important format of dialogue and cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about necessity, first of all, to the audience, we have a few minutes left, so please provide us with your questions. I hope we haven't overstretched your receptivity. Speaking about necessity, Dr. Polkamp, the Green Alliance has been, between Japan and the EU, has been the first the Green Alliance the European Union has concluded. And green transformation, green economic transformation has been the core priority, or one of the core priorities of the current EU Commission. During the term of former Prime Minister Suga, this had long been seen by many observers as a sign of a new green orientation of Japan. Do you see more potential? I mean, we have already talked about hydrogen cooperation. Do you see more potential of Europe and Japan being the front runners of green transformation in the world?
Yes, you are right. The Green Alliance had been more visible during the Suga administration in comparison to the Kishida administration. But this is also because of the many other topics the Kishida administration had been occupied with. And as far as I know, or at least in my opinion, this area has not been one of the key areas of Kishida in comparison to Prime Minister Suga. So the interest and the backbone to put this through maybe has been a bit stronger during the Suga administration in comparison to the Kishida administration. But of course, there are important areas also in this regard where I do see great potential, and especially in green technologies and research and development of green technologies. And this is something where both the EU and Japan are very much capable in putting this forward and have the expertise also to do that. So besides cooperation on clean hydrogen and the deliverables that have been established in the Green Alliance, I very much see a strong potential in the bilateral cooperation for green technologies and energy transitions and capability enhancement in third countries, and ocean government support, and also, and maybe this is one key issue, to promote initiatives and on an international, multilateral level, and yeah, and try to mitigate the threats that have been existent with regard to climate change, and to promote the joint approaches that this Green Alliance has. But at the moment, I mean, there's much potential and there should be more, and there has not been enough yet. We have a good foundation with the Green Alliance, it's a good basis, but there can be more, and there has not been enough yet.
Related to this issue, I would like to address this question to all of you. Related to this issue, the dimension of scarce resources has emerged as one of the core problems, especially with regard to hydrogen. And Koki, you mentioned before that Japan plays an important role also in relations to the global south. Is there a common approach between Japan and the European Union when it comes to relationships or to the competition on resource exploitation in Africa?
Yes, in regard to a energy resource, maybe after Russian invasion happened, the Europe is now importing from the Middle East the natural gas, and the portion of Japan is decreasing, and by the way, China is also increasing. So in this regard, we are kind of now kind of a rival in this regard. But of course, in a wider context, we have to cooperate. And to your question, the European Union is a rule maker. EU has 27 member states and has a huge rule-making power. And the kind of the EU maybe believes themselves as a gold standard, but sometimes this kind of the strong posture predicts with the global south again, and Japan can kind of the intermediary role in this regard. For instance, a data flow. Japan promoted the DFFT, data free flow with trust, which is promoted under the Abe administration. So EU has very conservative, strong data restriction, and the United States has their own data policy. China has their own policy. So Japan is kind of coordinating between them and the proposed DFFT. And in DFFT, Europe can join, United States can agree, and China perhaps acceptable. So this kind of to make the rule that can convict everyone. So in partnering with Japan, EU can get the feedback from the global south and utilizing this in the rule-making process. And we have to cooperate with the global south in order to tackle with the climate or energy. So this kind of a global issue, but EU alone can't make it. That is why the COP27 to be ended in failure, let's say. So to cooperate with the global south, I want to highlight the Japan's role in doing this. Thank you.
But this entails another problem. I mean, Japan itself suffers from a dependence of, I guess, meanwhile, 94% of oil supply from the Middle East. So is this something Japan has meanwhile recognized as a problem and tries to overcome, or is this something with a rather low priority?
I think now we already start discussion on the nuclear power plant, and that Prime Minister Kishida is keen on regenerate the nuclear power plant. So this is kind of a short-term solution to solve this energy crisis. And also, I mean, Japan have developed the very the good utility laid the gas turbine or a coal power plant. So this kind of technology can be exported to the neighboring countries such as ASEAN, because I mean, the energy mix is totally different from the region and the countries, and Japan's practice can be, applicable to the other countries, especially in this, difficult times in terms of energy. So long term, it's really difficult, and we have to seek the best way. But in the short term, we have to do something, what we can do. So nuclear.
Yes, another technology which has already been addressed within this event, semiconductors. Through the last years, Japan has started new common projects with its neighbors on the development of new modern semiconductors. For instance, last month, I believe it was last month or 2 months ago, Japan launched, or Japan corporations and the Japanese government launched a new Rapidus initiative in order to produce the next generation of semiconductors. Is there any cooperation with European corporations in terms of semiconductors, or is this an aspect rather neglected by European and Japanese policymakers and corporations? This question applies to all of you.
Okay, I mentioned the fact, I suppose, more than 50% of the semiconductor in the world are produced in the East Asia, the South Korea, Taiwan, Japan as well, and the United States. And another fact is actually the machine for producing the semiconductor. Actually, so the production schemes are also produced in Japan, United States, and the Netherlands. This is the current situation. And of course, to secure the economic securities, of course, that's a very important, essential part of the economy, the whole economy, since digitalization. Semiconductor is very important. And therefore, in principle, it's a very general discussion, but it's more close cooperation. So in the democratic world is very important. And Japan also, their Laplas initiatives, the Made in Japan initiatives, also is a very radical one. However, so it is somehow there are many type of the semiconductors, and so Japan has also focused on some areas, not all the comprehensive. This is a point. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly. So there's which type part of the semiconductor the considered, but for example, considering in the viewpoint of the economic security, the TSMC, so they invest huge investment for the semiconductor factory in Kyushu, and they planned the second factories in somewhere in Japan. Therefore, so considering the economic security, of course, it's impossible some kind of the geopolitical threat. This semiconductor is very essential for the all the world, and again, the Japan-European cooperation will be, of course, is very important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Polkamp, would you like to add something on this?
Well, I don't have a lot to add, but in terms of EU-Japan cooperation with regard to semiconductors, I mean, there has been a lot in the EU-Japan digital partnership, which deals with the resiliency of the supply chains of semiconductors. So this is at least one format where the resiliency strategies are combined, and where the EU and Japan are cooperating. And of course, I mean, generally speaking, the resiliency of semiconductor supply chains has been also part of economic security strategy of Japan, and I mean, is integrated in many different approaches. And yeah, as I said, also in the EU-Japan digital partnership, where the awareness of the very, very broad problem on semiconductors is there and is yeah, trying to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then one last question. The most noteworthy accomplishment made by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was the CPTPP agreement signed with North American and Asian states. Recently, consultations on a potential enlargement and extension of this trade agreement have been held. Do you see any indications that this might include Europe as well, or is this rather a discussion among experts?
Well, let me answer first. CPTPP is now have, I think, 11 or 13 member states, and the UK, China, and Taiwan is applying now. So it's under the kind of a, what do you say, under the process. And I don't think the CPTPP trying to try EU to join CPTPP, but rather the approach is to align with the EU trade framework. EU is, originated in trade or economic partnerships, and they have a very complicated and bureaucratic long process. And maybe if CPTPP start negotiating with EU, it takes maybe 20 or 50 years. So it's not realistic.
Optimistic.
But well, yeah, exactly. But I think at least the CPTPP can complement its weakness in partnering with EU, and also EU can complement the weak point in partnering with the CPTPP. So this kind of alignment, or the EU CPTPP Grand Alliance could be possible and would be very fruitful. So I think that this approach is feasible and really, impactful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So any further remarks? It's your last opportunity. Okay, so then I'd like to give one last chance to the audience, in case you have any questions left to one of these many dimensions mentioned within this debate. Please put the F and A button and yes, provide us with your question. It's your last opportunity. Otherwise, we'll soon come to an end. That's not the case. Well, I believe we have indeed overstretched the receptivity of our participants with our very broad discussion. I mean, we have covered, well, really a broad set of different topics. But yes, I'm very delighted that we could make this possible. And yes, I thank you, all of you, for your kind participation. And again, sorry for some difficulties at the beginning. And yes, I'm looking forward to continue our exchange. And yes, to the audience, many thanks for your attention. I hope you, as well as I, have learned a lot from this discussion. And yes, I think I speak on behalf of all of us in thanking Consul General Asasuma, Koki, and Dr. Polkamp for your invaluable insights, and I'm looking forward to continue your exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you very